Israel, yeah.
They made a lot.
Hashem should
They said there's another
make his
24.
miracles. I want to get
Still alive.
Yeshua Hashem clarifying because I want to get going because I also want to maybe we can say a word about Purim also. In other words, besides for
Next week.
we got Zachar and we got Purim, Bacher, and Gemora, as Ephraim said.
Well, it's
But
next
so
week.
what we'll do?
When's Purim?
Okay, so first of all, a bit of
Not this one, the next one.
So basically what happened was I was looking at the days ahead. I know that we did talk about a Siyum, but it just seems impossible to get it off the ground because I'm traveling at the end of March to a Simcha and Saul is traveling.
No, you don't have to wait for Saul.
No, we are gonna
We're gonna have
it before you come back, and then we have another one when you come back. We're gonna have one with you because we're not gonna wait 6 months. We'll be very hungry if we wait 6 months. But we'll make another one in November with Saul.
We'll make one for Christmas.
But we'll make one on long with you.
Because, sorry?
We'll make it on long with you.
We'll make one.
Yeah.
The only thing is the poor man's gonna be starving.
Just there was
Are we gonna be?
so much going on in the next few weeks because we off to York soon, my family, for my son's wedding. That's a few days after Purim. And then we come back a week before Pesach. And then,
We wait for a month almost.
no, 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
We're away for 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks.
$12, 3 weeks from today. 3 weeks from tonight. In fact, it's a Monday night. I won't have a share that week.
So we have to do it online.
If any of you are going to be,
Give us a sure South African time.
yeah. If any of you are going to be in New York in 3 weeks' time, you can come to the Chasana. I'll put an invite on the share group. So, or you can still come with pleasure. There's a very good special with Kenya. For sure there's whiskey there. Kenya.
Now we do the whiskey. Which
Best,
So,
I'm actually flying via Deutschland.
Deutschland.
Yeah. With United.
Yeah, United is in partnership with Lufthansa. So anyway, so there's a lot going on. And the next week, at the end of the week, is Purim, and I have the yard site for my father in the middle of everything. So it's going to be a lot to juggle. So that's why I thought that we're just going to have to reschedule our Siyum that we were planning to make for after Pesach. So please God, one
slowly.
sorry,
Slowly.
already finished it, completed Gemora. But I think we'll we'll just start a little ballad, and then we'll move to stuff about Purim, and then come back. We can also do a little bit on Pesach. Don't forget to Pesach. And Danny, you were talking a lot about Achdus, the Achdus of the Jewish people. So please, God, Hashem should help. We should be able to be together, united, and it should be. We should feel the spirit of Adar and Purim, like of a Simcha with Nasan Vikar. So we finished last week the chapter. Because it's getting a bit of feedback over here. Yeah, let me just do a mute all. We finished last week the chapter called Kol HaTzlomim, all of the statues, and we've come to the chapter that's Rabbi Yishmael Omer Shalosh Havalim Zu B'Tzad Zu. This particular chapter starts off by analyzing a particular type of avodah zarah that was common in the land of Canaan, called Markulis, Mercury or Markulis. And what was a little bit unique about this type of avodah zarah was instead of building a statue, as was the case in many other kinds where they would have like a sculptured out statue or an idol like that, Markulis was a pile of stones. The way it worked with Markulis was they gathered a whole heap or pile of stones, and the pile of stones itself became the deity. But what made it confusing is that one of the ways of serving this particular idol or this particular deity was by throwing stones at it. That's a very interesting way of serving a god by throwing stones at it. But that's one of the things they did. They threw stones, or sometimes they threw stones into the pile to make the pile bigger. And basically that would mean that this pile of stones was prohibited for use by Yidden because of Avodah Zarah. And there's an analysis about other stones that are found over there. You know, if you go to a nursery and you are trying to, how would you call it, do some landscaping in a garden, people like to use stones and pebbles. They're also used sometimes to make a pathway, all different kinds of decor. So what about these stones that are parts of the idol Markulis? The ones that are already standing in the pile and the ones that are next to the pile. And that's what this Mishnah deals with. Masnis in the Mishnah starts off by saying, Rabbi Yishmael Omer, Rabbi Yishmael taught. So this is what Rabbi Yishmael taught. Shalosh avonim zu b'tzad markulis asurais. If you've got three stones adjacent to each other, next to each other, and the three stones that are next to each other are next to this heap of stones, which is called mercury or markulis, this pile of stones called an idol markulis. If you've got three in a formation, those are prohibited. In other words, Rabbi Yishmael says that there's a minimum of loose stones that would be prohibited, because the style was that when they would set them up for idolatrous purposes, they would line up at least three in a row next to the pile. If it's less than three in a row, like if you don't catch that minimum of three, if you've got only two or so, then those would have just fallen there, or somebody dropped them there. They're not necessarily connected to the idol. So his key issue, Rabbi Yishmael, is the amount. If there's three of them in a row, that's their style, that's how they do their service. Don't forget that we've always said with Avodah Zarah, we're always interested in how do they do their service? What is actually the ritual? Because that's where the Yisurim, the prohibitions of Avodah Zarah, are very related to the way in which they do their service. And the way in which the service is here is in that type of amount. So he says you need to have a minimum of three, and the three also have to be more or less near the pile. If they're too far, then maybe they don't belong to it. And the sages say that it doesn't have to do with numbers. It doesn't matter if it's three, it can be less than three. If they're next to it, then they're prohibited. Not next to it, mutaris, they're permitted. The issue is not how many there are, the issue is how close are they to the pile. If they're near the pile, we must assume that they're part of it. And if they're not near the pile, we must assume that they're not part of it, that it's incidental. This heap is the problem, and a little bit of a distance is not the problem. So you've got a Mishnah that gives you two different perspectives on the stones that are next to Markulis and what would be the issue. The Gemora says, so let's try and unpack and understand their different points of view. Why are the rabbis concerned about stones next to the pile? This heap called Markulis, and Rabbi Yishmael says only if there's more than three. And the rabbis don't seem to give a number. It doesn't matter how many there are. The only thing that matters is how close they are to the rest of the pile. So, we understand, if we unpack it, the thinking of the rabbis, because they are of the view they hold that idolaters serve pieces. Even if something's broken, and even if something's in pieces, generally speaking, idolaters continue to serve the pieces. If they think that the whole is a deity, they'll serve the broken pieces as well. And therefore, it doesn't matter whether they've broken off or fallen down, or they're still part of it, because they serve pieces. If you have another point of view that when it comes to idols, idolaters don't serve pieces, they won't be concerned about something that broke off or fell off, because that other point of view would say we don't serve pieces. But they believe that idolaters do serve the shvarim, and therefore, where are they? Niros imai, if they're next to the pile, the ikala meima minay nafal, where you can say that they literally fell off that pile. They were part of the group or the pile of the Avodah Zarah. And therefore, Asurais, that's why they prohibited. If they're not next to the pile, they're not connected with the rest of the idol, then mutaris, then they permit it, because they're not necessarily pieces of that pile. And if they're not pieces of that pile, then they're okay. It's neutral. So that's why
I'll get there in the first place. Somebody been?
the idolaters of Markulis build it, just like
But, when you say Mercury, was it not anything to do with the planet Mercury?
well, it did have connections to that, because sometimes idolaters would build things in this world that they would say are a manifestation of mazolas, of stuff in other worlds. So it has the same name. In other words, I think it's one of the Roman gods, actually, or the Greek mythological gods. There was a Mercury. Sounds Greek, a Mercury. So basically, there was a particular Avodah Zarah called Mercury, or Markulis. And what they did for this one was they built a pile of stones, a huge big heap of stones, and that would be the way in which they worshipped it. That would be the way in which that thing symbolized whatever the force is that is represented. By the way, just a general idea, because we're coming up soon to Parshas Kitisa, which talks about the Egel Azav, the golden calf, which is like the paradigm of all idolatry. What we have to remember is that the essence of idolatry, if you think about what Avodah Zarah is that humans have a hard time relating to spiritual things, because we don't all have spiritual perception. We don't have an ability to so-called hold on to something that is spiritual. So what people would do is they would create a physical replica of what they believe to be a spiritual force. So for instance, when the Jews made an Egel Azav, a golden calf, what they were essentially saying is that there's some spiritual force on high, which is represented by this golden calf. There is some spiritual force on high, which is represented by this pile of stones or this Asherah tree, or whichever other kind of Avodah Zarah it is. It wasn't so basic that they were just dumb people. Like when we were kinderlach, we thought, silly people that they could serve, stones and wood and whatever. Often there was deep spiritual significance to what they were doing. It was connected to some kind of voodoo, to some kind of spiritual story. And that's why, how do we know? The Torah tells us that you're not allowed to do it, because there was often there were certain powers that various things had. But those powers were created by Hashem himself in order to be the Nisayan, to test. And that's why it was in the days of old, Avodah Zarah was very, very popular. In other words, it was a big taiva in the world.
The star before Abraham.
Yeah. Before Abraham, and also in Canaan many years later, in the Canaanite nations.
One God.
Exactly. Very, very,
Abraham's father was idolater.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. Hello, Rabbi Yishmael, my Kosovar. The Gemora wants to know. Gentlemen, back in the book. Hello, Rabbi Yishmael, my Kosovar. The Gemora wants to know, what is what's the basis of Rabbi Yishmael's reasoning? The sages, we understand. Their view is that you worship pieces. Are these stones that have fallen off considered pieces? Are they a chip off the old block? If we can borrow that expression, are these stones that have fallen down a chip off the old block, or they're not? That's the sages. Elo Rabbi Yishmael my Kosovar. But Rabbi Yishmael, what is the basis of his ruling? His opinion in the Mishnah is based on what? What is this business that he names a number? And he says you need to have 3 stones in a row. And if it's less than 3, it's not a problem. If he agrees with the sages, that the idolaters, that the goyim, or those that are idolaters of this particular type of idolatry would worship broken pieces or independent stones that have fallen off the heap. Even 2 should be prohibited. What is the story that it has to be 3? Why is 2 okay and 3 is not okay? If his opinion is that you don't serve pieces, that the problem is the heap of itself. And if the heap breaks, the pieces are not served, afilu klos lamela, even 3 should not be a problem. Then even 3 that fell off are now broken pieces of an idol. Idolaters, according to that opinion, don't serve broken pieces. What is going on over here? What is his opinion? Omar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef, Omar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Yosef says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, we got to explain this. Let's categorize this. And let's say, do we know or do we not know that these stones fell from that pile? In other words, you've got a pile that's a problem, but stones can come from somewhere else also. Do we know or don't we know that these stones fell down from that pile? And what is the argument between Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis? If we know for sure that these stones fell down from that pile that was put there for Avodah Zarah, Devra Kol Asurais, there is no argument. Everybody agrees that these stones that are lying there next to it are prohibited. Nobody says that because they fell down and they're broken, their status is revoked. Everybody would agree, Rabbi Yishmael and the sages prohibited. And even according to the opinion that says that the idolaters don't serve pieces, so pieces do have their status revoked, that is with regard to the kind of avodah zarah that it's not its way to be constructed like this in a normal manner. But here, the meikora tabeira metabra, that from the beginning, the concept is that this is a pile. This is its usual way. In other words, what the Gemora is explaining is as follows. If you've got a statue, if you've got an image that a sculptor sculpted, when something's broken, it's really broken. You can see that it's broken. It's a broken piece. So there you would have an argument between 2 opinions. Is a broken piece of an idol still considered avodah zarah or not? Has the breakage caused the status to be revoked? Because anybody that looks at it can see that it's broken and it needs the repairman to come and fix it. So if it's a statue, and now let's say it's got an arm and the arm comes flying off because whatever, the joint got messed or somebody bumped into it. So that could be where you have an argument, where one side says, once it's broken, the people that serve it say that's no longer a god. Gods don't break. As Avraham Avinu said to his father, gods don't break. Now, 1 second, we're getting there. We're getting there. I'll give it in 1 moment. So if it's an actual thing that could break, and a piece of it broke off, that's where people might say the fact that a piece is broken nullifies the rest of it. Sorry, nullifies the broken piece. Sorry, not the whole thing, the broken piece. Because then sometimes maybe even the whole thing, but especially the broken piece, the people that serve it are going to say this thing is no longer performing the way it's supposed to. Yeah. And therefore, we revoke its status as avodah zarah. But if you've got a pile of stones, they were never connected to each other in the first place. The usual way of a pile of stones is somebody comes with a rake or a shovel and he piles them up. And then he might disassemble them, reassemble them, make them more dense, make them less dense. The nature of a pile, where the pebbles or the stones in the pile are not connected to each other, it's not like a mosaic, where somebody says, the architect says, take all these pieces and grout them, put them together so that they're now connected. They were never connected. It's a kind of avodah zarah where you have a pile of pieces, and the pile of pieces always was pieces and always will be pieces. And when something's always pieces, it's natural that sometimes in a heavy wind or rain or whatever, some pieces go off, some pieces go on. The guy who's in charge of cleanup might take them from the bottom and stick them back on the top, and then they fall off on the other side. That's the way it's supposed to be. So therefore, according to this, even those people that say that broken pieces are not avodah zarah, here it's pieces to start off with. This is an assembly of pieces. So everybody would agree. Sorry? Huh? It's got to go to the opposite of Shabbos. So everybody would agree that this particular pile is a problem, even when it's pieces. But kipliga, when do they argue bistama? When nobody knows where the stones come from. In other words, the entire argument of the Mishnah is not about stones that everybody knows for sure fell off this pile. It's about stones that are standing somewhere near there, and nobody really knows if they come from that pile or they don't come from that pile. And and likewise, stones that are near the pile, that one can say that they fell down from it. Everybody says prohibited. When is the argument? When it comes to stones that are already a bit distant from this pile of stones that are avodah zarah. Those ones that are a bit distant, now we don't know if they came from it or they don't come from it. If there's enough of a distance that when a person walks by, he can't say for sure that they came from there, maybe they came from there. That is where you have this whole argument between Rabbi Yishmael and the rabbis. That is where Rabbi Yishmael says that they need to line up in a formation of 3, because that pattern would give us an idea that that's those people's way of setting up those stones. And that is when the rabbis say that it makes a difference whether it's near or far from there. So I think in the Gemora, we're going to stop over there, and we're going to change over to a few thoughts on Purim. And we'll continue with this the next time. Exactly.
We need
Okay.
something more
Yeah.
synthetic.
Yeah. So basically, oops, no, I closed that down. That was a mistake. Sorry, Les, whoever's on. We have Purim coming up on Thursday night next week. And then before that, we have Shabbos Parsha Zachar. This week, Shabbos, the Shabbos before Purim. It's this week already. Yeah. It's Shabbos Parsha Zachar, the Shabbos that is dedicated to remember Amalek. We should remember what Amalek did to us on the way that we were coming out of Egypt. The Jewish people were coming out of Egypt. We had the story recently. We read it in Bacher. That's right. When Amalek attacked the Jewish people, and we had to go out and fight with them. Now, there is a strong connection
But
between...
they're still attacking us, but in Gaza.
There's a strong connection.
In Israel.
Yeah, the issue of Amalek was raised in the ICJ. I mean, in the Havdil. Yeah.
The same nation.
Yeah. So now, there is a connection between Zachar and Purim. The Haftarah of Zachar, which is the story of Shaul HaMelech. King Shaul received an instruction through Shmuel HaNavi, through the Navi Shmuel, that he had to have a war with Amalek, and he had to destroy Amalek in its entirety, including Agag, the king, and the people and the animals. Everything had to be destroyed.
Yeah.
And Shaul had, how would you call it? He softened up. He had a little bit of compassion, and he decided not to spare Agag and to spare some of the people and some of the animals. And Hashem came to tell Shmuel that I'm unhappy with Shaul because he didn't follow Hamelech Shaul. King Shaul didn't follow what I wanted him to follow. So I'm unhappy with him. And that was that very sad story that Hashem said, I'm going to take the Malchus for this reason. He's going to lose the kingdom. I'm going to take the kingdom away from him because he didn't listen to me. And then in the Haftarah of this week, we read that Shmuel HaNavi goes to Shaul, and Shaul tries to defend himself. And he says, I kept the animals for Hashem. They were beautiful animals, and I wanted to sacrifice them. Meitav hatzoyin v'chalbayin, the fat of these animals, these choicest animals that they had, can become sacrificial offerings to Hashem. We can use them to serve Hashem. That's why I kept them. And you have the response of Shmuel is Shmoya Mizevach Toiv, that Hashem wants us to listen to him more than sacrifices. Listening to what Hashem wants us to do is more important than the sacrifices. The connection to Purim is that Haman was a descendant of Agag. In fact, according to the sages, the fact that they were spared over there allowed certain extra people to be born, and eventually it allowed Haman to come from that remnant that remained. And in fact, the story of Purim was caused by the story of Shaul HaMelech with Agag and Amalek, because he spared Agag. So that's why Haman rose up all those years later. And one of the interesting things, if we try to analyze, the Gemora says that Sholem Melech was a very righteous and pious person. He was a good man, and he didn't err in many ways. So how did he go wrong with this one? How did he run into trouble? So he thought to himself that the whole purpose of life in this world is to transform the gashmius, the physical, the material, into ruchnius, into spiritual. The reason that Hashem put us in this world is that we are the ones who literally, a sacrifice is symbolic of it, but we take the physical of the material and we turn it into spiritual. And that is highlighted more than anything by a sacrifice, by korbanos. So Sholem Melech thought that perhaps the best way to serve Hashem is to take these beautiful animals and to have the opportunity to save them and keep them in order to sacrifice them to Hashem above. Where did he go wrong? Is that it's not always about our reasoning. If you're told by the Navi that the way to do it is to destroy, even if you don't understand, there has to be what's called Kabbalat Ol. Accepting that this is it. That what one has to do is to listen. And the call of the moment can be different. Sometimes there's some situations where intellect and logic does apply, and we have to apply our understanding. But there's also certain situations where the call of the hour is Mesirat Nefesh, self-sacrifice, and Kabbalat Ol, accepting upon ourselves what has to be. And now we know also that the other way around applies as well, that the purpose of Torah and mitzvahs is not that we shouldn't understand anything. If somebody says the other way around, that it's got nothing at all to do with your mind, that it's got nothing at all to do with your cheshbonot, your calculations. But it says clearly in Torah also that Hashem wants us to put our seichel to it, to use our minds and to think and to calculate. However, the balance of how we mix emunah and seichel, the faith and the accepting of the yoke of Hashem with the seichel, that's the trick, is how do we balance the two? And what has to come first, where's the priority? The priority is, first comes the emunah, first comes the faith and the mesiras nefesh, and followed on from that comes the seichel. That's why there's a pasuk, there's a verse in Tehillim, which says, Tuv tam v'das lamdaini, which means we say to Hashem, teach me tam v'das, teach me the reasons and the understanding of everything. Why? Ki b'mitzvah secho he'amanti, because I believed in your mitzvahs. In other words, once I've done the phase of emunah, once the faith is there, then there's also a mitzvah to have the tam v'das, where Shaul HaMelech erred was he switched this around. The first should have been the emunah and the Navi. The Navi said that Hashem's commandment is that these animals have to be destroyed. And only after accepting that, you can then start using your own intellect. If you use your own intellect, then you can run into troubles. And that's why the troubles of Haman and the Purim story were also based on too much own calculations. Many of the things that we did wrong as a nation in Achashverosh's kingdom, which caused the Atzoros, was from too much thinking, not too little. Too many cheshbonos, too many calculations. And that's why in the end, what saved us, the antidote to all of that, was mesirat nefesh, or self-sacrifice. Because self-sacrifice is the answer. You know what we fight is we're thinking too much when we fight. It's too much debating, thinking. It's not the call of the hour is what has to be done, has to be done. It's too much pausing to think.
Didn't know that it's going to be like that. It's like what's happened, they're trying.
But he was supposed to, as a king, he was supposed to listen.
Like Moses with
but he had he had a Navi, he had Shmuel to tell him what to do, and he should have done it. So the answer to that is mesiras nefesh. And when, we'll talk in a second, when we apply mesiras nefesh, self-sacrifice, as Esther did, Esther Amalka applied self-sacrifice in going into Achashverosh and taking Haman to task. He was the most powerful man around. She had to really devise a schematic way to try and pull him down from his very, very powerful and cozy position.
Wasn't her choice.
It wasn't. But she had but she had Mesirat Nefesh, yeah. And she went in that way, and that's why also the Avodah of Purim is, we're told, is Ad Velo Yada. You know what Ad Velo Yada means? That we make a mishnah, we celebrate till we don't know Ad Velo Yada bein Baruch Mordechai and Arur Haman. We don't know the difference between blessed Mordechai and Baruch Mordechai and Arur Haman. Sorry?
I know about
Yeah. You know what Baruch Mordechai is all about? That's all about Seichel. That's when we're analyzing things ourselves. What is order in the world? The story of Purim is going much higher than that. It's accepting that the world has a balabas, the world has a boss in charge, that's Hashem above. And our first step is to plug into the emunah, to plug into the faith and the sacrifice. And after that, we bring it down into our intellect, into our knowledge. L'chaim. Please God, we should experience in Adar,
Amen. But we have because the Parsha.
Sorry?
The Parsha.
Zocher. Zocher.
We did Zocher. Ephraim was the word on Tetzaveh.
Tetzaveh.
Yeah. Okay. So Tetzaveh. So what should we say about Tetzaveh? Va'ato Tetzaveh. You should command. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu. Tetzaveh is the first parsha that doesn't have any mention of the name of Moshe Rabbeinu. Every single parsha from the time that Moshe is born in Shmos has his name. Tetzaveh is the one that doesn't have his name. And the reason is because when Hashem said he was going to destroy the Jewish people, Moshe's answer was, if you're going to start with the Jewish people, then I'm going to take away my naming rights. You can't use my name in your Torah. And even though Hashem forgave the Jewish people, and even though obviously Moshe could be mentioned, the words of a tzaddik have to be fulfilled in some way. So the fulfillment of that is the fact that the name is missing in Tetzaveh. But it's deeper than that. A name, as important as it is also a limitation. A name represents a certain type of keli, a certain kind of vessel. But if you go deeper than that, there is an essence which is not even able to be described by a name. Like we know that, for instance, if you name a person, it's categorizing. You call them Mr. So-and-so, will you come, they hear their name. But as we know, the name doesn't always encapsulate the absolute essence of the person. There's a higher level of the neshama that's above any kind of name. And that's called Va'ato Tetzaveh. And you who is even higher than any kind of name or limitation. Chaim, okay. You're going to say Kaddish, Ephraim. Bracha Achronim and then Kaddish.
Moshe, you had the other names.